daydream numbs my mind. Turn on the lights, I'm still blind. Speed up, slow down, wheels keep on spinning. I play the game, I'm now winning. I've been east, I've been west, I've been put to the test. I've been high, I've been low, I don't know where to go. I've been lost, I've been found, I've been spinning around. Here's what's left of me now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Into the Weeds podcast here on Military Broadcast Radio. I'm Amber. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a great show for you today. We actually have an author, Robert B. O'Connor, and I'm honored to speak to him today. He is the author of Jeep Show, A Trouper at the Battle of the Bulge, and it's a powerful World War II novel blending frontline entertainment with the realities of war. Beyond his writing, Robert has a deep commitment to history, storytelling, and causes close to his heart. And for those of you that don't know, Jeep Show sheds light on the entertainers who lifted morale during World War II, specifically during the Battle of the Bulge. But what I also find interesting about Robert's journey is that he has also worked as a marketer and author, and he also has served on the board of Thistle Bee, helping survivors of human trafficking. So today we are going to explore his book and his inspirations and the causes that he cares about. So without further ado, we're going to bring up Robert.
Interview of the week sponsored by LTD Tactical.
Hello, Robert, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Good evening, Amber. It's really a pleasure to talk to you and to your listeners. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, you're welcome. And it looks like we're having a little bit of internet issues, but hopefully it works out after the recording. Okay. So can you tell us, well, actually, I've been listening to your book. I'm almost in the 7th chapter. And right. I love history. I am a huge history nerd, and I love fiction. So blending history and fiction to me is just about as great as it can be.
Yes.
Unless you add some science fiction in there, some time traveling or something like that.
Oh, yes. Some kind of magic realism. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
We didn't do that. We didn't do that in Jeep Show.
No, you didn't. Okay. So, Robert, you've shared that Jeep Show started with a story you heard decades ago in your bio about James Hertzer and the Oxydol Circus.
Yes,
what is that about? And can you?
Sure.
Because when I heard about that, I was like, "What is that?"
Well, part of it is a different generation. Oxydol was a brand of detergent. In the up until the 50s, 60s, and 70s, it was as well known as Tide or Ivory or one like that. I started out my working career at Procter & Gamble, the soap company, and I heard the story of the Oxydol Circus, which in a nutshell is a circus promoter convinced the Oxydol brand in the late 60s to sponsor his circus. It turned out to be a disaster, humorous only in retrospect.
Okay.
I wanted to write about the Oxydol Circus because it's quite a story. And I found out the name of the circus promoter, Jim Hetzer, as you mentioned. And
Mhm.
I happened to contact his daughter, and she was happy to talk about his life in the circus. But she also told me that he had an interesting job in World War II. He was an MOS 442, which is an enlisted entertainer. And
Mhm.
enlisted entertainers, as you were saying, they did two things. They put on what were called soldier shows, which were kind of amateur shows with a cast of soldiers and soldiers in the supporting roles, really to keep soldiers busy
Mhm.
in their free time. And they did that mostly in the rear echelon. And then after the war was over, Second World War. But the second thing they did, and the thing they did most, were called Jeep shows. And it was literally 3 enlisted entertainers and a driver would get in a Jeep and drive to about a mile behind the front lines. And this
Oh,
was
wow.
this was the only way combat infantry could get any kind of entertainment. So when the combat infantry were pulled back, to get a hot meal, perhaps to get a uniform exchange, be pulled about a mile back, still within artillery range. But these performers would put on a small variety show. In the book, one of them calls it a K-ration version of a variety show. Not as good, but very portable. So I found out about that. Jim Hetzer's daughter told me this, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, that is fascinating." And she said, "Bob, Jim wrote home from the war twice a week at least. That's what
Mhm.
people did back in the 40s." And
Yes.
his older sister, she said, my aunt saved every letter he wrote back from the European Theater of Operations.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
so I said, I was thinking, oh, primary sources.
Yeah.
And I said, can I come down to Dallas and just look at those letters? I'll put on, white cotton archival gloves. I'll be very careful. And she said, oh, don't worry. My sister published them in a book. You can buy it on Amazon. So I bought that book, and a week later, I had access to several hundred letters that Jim Hetzer had written home from both training camps, which is always interesting, and also from the European Theater of Operations.
Mhm.
So when I found out about that, I wanted to write about this man's experience in World War II. But I wanted to write also fiction because I felt that there's so many good nonfiction books about World War II and detailed aspects of it and different units and certainly different campaigns and different leaders. But to tell it in historical fiction, to be very accurate with the facts, but to spin a story around it, I think makes it more accessible to people who are not World War II aficionados or younger people who, Amber, who may be a little put off by some of the nonfiction tomes that are out there. And I wanted to drag him into the Battle of the Bulge. And Jim Hetzer, the real person, was not caught up in the Battle of the Bulge. But I had the main character, who I named Jim Tanzer. I had the main character get separated from his Jeep show unit up on the border of Luxembourg and Germany. And then he spends the night of December 15th, 1944 in a company headquarters and expects that on December 16th, 1944, he will just get in a truck and rejoin his unit. But he's rudely awakened at 5 a.m. on December 16th, 1944 by a massive German artillery attack, which preceded the German counterattack that we call the Battle of the Bulge.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is the Battle of the Bulge? Because I really don't know much about it.
Sure.
When something gets me intrigued, I'll start researching it. And your book has done that, but I didn't have time to research anything.
Right. You're very kind. I'll give you the basics of it. This was December 1944. The Allied armies, mostly American, but also some British and some Free French, had advanced by September. They'd advanced literally to the German border. They got stuck there because they had outrun their supply lines. And the Germans had brilliantly wrecked every port. As they surrendered territory, they demolished every port. So the the Allied armies were kind of stuck in Eastern Belgium and Luxembourg, and they were there from mid-September or so. And in the units that were posted to the border in what's called the Ardennes, which is a heavily forested, very hilly, difficult terrain section of Belgium and Luxembourg. The units that were posted along in front of the Ardennes were the 28th Division and a couple of others that had been in some very difficult fighting, and were sent to this area to kind of rest and refit, but also to guard the border. So the American troops were stretched very thin. Now, Hitler had this idea of attacking once again through the Ardennes, which would be a repeat of what he did in 1939 so successfully when he overran France. Hitler had this idea that they would do it again, that this would divide the American and British forces, that they'd get up to Antwerp, that the Americans and British would sue for peace, and then Hitler could turn his attention to the Russians, who were heading for Berlin closer every day. It was a crazy plan, and his top generals didn't like it, and they suggested more moderate plans, but Hitler was crazy. So they executed this plan. There's much controversy as to how the Germans gathered so many men and so much equipment right on the border, literally 2 or 3 miles from the American outposts, without being detected. But other than lower level officers like the captain in, I think it is chapter 5, the captain who reports hearing motor noises and suspects a German, at least a spoiling attack coming. So he rearranges his mortars that very night in case there are spies that see where they are. So the Germans came over. It was 3 German armies: the 6th Panzer Army, the 5th Panzer Volksgrenadiers, and the 7th Army. They came over in 3 very large groups, one in the north, one in the south, and one in the middle. The Americans were caught completely by surprise. There was outposts were overrun, like Company K in the book in Hosingen, Luxembourg, surrounded and overrun, and there was a general retreat. Although many American units fought extremely hard and delayed the German advance significantly, which was an important factor. Probably the Germans kind of ran wild for about 5 days. They started to stall out, and within probably at the end of the first week or so, it was apparent that this last desperate gamble by Hitler was not going to pay off. It was about 200,000 German troops, about 1,000 German tanks facing about 80,000 American soldiers.
Oh, wow.
The battle was the coldest winter in Europe in 100 years. So after the first few days, both sides faced very harsh winter conditions, snow and freezing temperatures. The name Battle of the Bulge, which is the American name for the battle, comes from the fact that the German advance only in the middle of the American line succeeded, and it succeeded quite well for a few days. So there was a quote unquote bulge in the American front line due to the German advance, and so that's how it was about a 50-mile long bulge in the American line. Crucially, the weather was horrible, which is typical for the Ardennes in December. And so American air power and the American airplanes were grounded. And by that time, as you probably know, Amber, the Americans and the Allies had complete air superiority. So part of Hitler's desperate gamble was that the weather would stay bad long enough for his troops to make the big breakthrough, which it did not. It was the largest battle ever fought by the U.S. Army. We had, yes, by far, we had 19,000 killed in the Battle of the Bulge, 48,000 wounded, and 23,000 missing or captured. There were a lot of soldiers that ended up as POWs. We believe the Germans had 100,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and captured. And strategically, the Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive, basically just weakened them so that the Soviets on the east were able to advance at an even faster pace. Certainly, before the Battle of the Bulge, the high German generals already knew that the war was lost. But after the German offensive failed at the Bulge, not without inflicting a lot of suffering on the American troops, but after the German offensive failed, it was clear that the war would be over sooner rather than later. And I do say, and I researched it fairly substantially, the Battle of the Bulge was a real testimony to the resilience and the determination of the American soldiers, because caught completely by surprise, outmanned and outgunned in horrible weather, cut off, they managed to delay the German offensive long enough that there was no chance of it succeeding. And you haven't gotten to the chapters yet set in Bastogne, but the protagonist, Jim Tanzer, retreats town by overrun town into Bastogne, where he is put in a unit, and this unit existed. It was called Team Snafu. And some of your listeners may know what Snafu stands for. This is probably a family program, so I won't detail it completely, but situation normal, all somethinged up. And Team Snafu was made up of infantrymen who had escaped from overrun companies. It was made up of rear echelon soldiers, bakers, barbers, telephone operators, clerks, and in one soldier's case, an entertainment soldier that got caught up in. And Team Snafu, the Airborne, 101st Airborne is justly celebrated for the defense, the heroic defense of Bastogne. Team Snafu not gotten the same publicity because it was not an organization that existed before or after the defense of Bastogne, but they had to fill the gaps in between the 101st battalions. Those gaps had to be filled, and they were filled by these bakers, barbers, entertainment soldiers who all had been to basic training and knew how to fire an M1 Garand, but still they did great work. And so there are several chapters in the book showing the various missions that the protagonist is sent on as part of Team Snafu. Okay,
now is this right around the same time where the guy jumps out of the plane and he gets stuck on the clock tower or whatever?
That was D-Day. So D-Day was June 6th. And what you're referring to it relates to the fact that on D-Day, the paratroopers actually went over at about midnight. The landings were to commence at 6 a.m. The paratroopers went over at about midnight. and they got dropped all over the place, almost everywhere except where they were supposed to be dropped. And Band of Brothers, the brilliant miniseries, does a great job of showing the chaos. Interestingly, though, speaking of paratroopers, there was the most badass, paratroopers are basically pretty badass infantry. The most badass of the paratroopers are called pathfinders. And pathfinders drop into areas and put up smoke pots and beacons for the other paratroopers or supply drops to know where to go. And one of the chapters involves the protagonist being at a landing zone and watching the pathfinders come in to set up the landing zone. And then there was a tremendous, the first day the skies cleared for airplanes, there was a tremendous supply drop into Bastogne of ammunition and food and medicine. So there are paratroopers in the book, but they are the pathfinders.
Yeah, the guy who got stuck up on the tower, my husband's grandfather said that was his cousin. Yeah. I don't remember his name, and I think there's a statue or something like that up at
yes,
First Airport or something like that. Yeah,
I'm sure there is. I'll give you a piece of trivia. There was a movie, and I think it's called The Longest Day, from the early 1960s, and it is about D-Day, and they show that paratrooper. The actor who plays the paratrooper is a man named Red Buttons. You're a little bit young, but Red Buttons was a very successful television comedian in the 60s, had his own show. And Red Buttons was an entertainment soldier in World War II and did juke shows. He was an unknown. He was just a kid. He was an unknown, but he like the protagonist, was an MOS 442 entertainment soldier and did Jeep shows.
Okay, that's awesome. So we're going to take a break, and then when we come back, I want to talk to you about some of the more interesting stories that you found in your research.
Sure.
Some of the really cool nuggets that no one knows. Okay,
Until today.
Yes, we are going to listen to Way Jennings, and it's called One Folded, and we will be right back with Robert O'Connor.
Through with this, then I watched the evening news. There were folks that still wouldn't stand for the old red, white, and blue. At first it made me fight and mad how they think that that's okay. Then I thought they just don't understand, and given a chance I'd say, have you ever been there when taps was played or for a 21-gun salute? Had to hear the words you never want to hear? Have you ever had to face that truth? When a son or daughter didn't come back home to a family so devoted, then you might not disrespect our flag. If you'd ever been handed one folded, have you seen a heartbroken mother or a father fall to his knees? Been there when a family got the news that your freedom wasn't free? Have you seen a flag draped coffin? If you did, how'd it make you feel? to know a soldier died to give you the right to stand or kneel. Most of us are immigrants, proud to call America home. And I'll stand for the red, white, and blue, even if I gotta stand alone. 'Cause I've been there when taps was playing for a 21-gun salute. I had to hear the words I didn't want to hear. Yeah, I had to face that truth. When a son and daughter didn't come back home to a family so devoted. You never disrespect our flag. If you'd ever been handed one folded, you never disrespect our flag. If you'd ever been handed one folded. One folded.
Tune in to Clatto's Cacophony of Sound every Saturday night from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern on Military Broadcast Radio at mbradio.us or on Twitch at DJ_Clatto. MBR, giving veterans a voice.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Welcome back to Into the Weeds podcast here on Military Broadcast Radio. That was Wade Jennings, One Folded, and we're back with our guest, Robert O'Connor. And we're talking about his book, Jeep Show. And Robert, so before we left off, we were talking a little bit about the battle. Well, you told us a lot about the Battle of the Bulge. Thank you, by the way. And I was wondering, so you have to weave history and fiction together, and you place Mickey Rooney in this story. And first of all, I did not realize that he served. I guess I just thought he was part of the USO or something like that. I did not realize that he served. And for him to have actually been on the front, did he really go on the front lines?
He was on the front lines doing Jeep shows. In fact, the gentleman that inspired the protagonist was in Mickey Rooney's Jeep Squad. So he literally did shows with Mickey Rooney. And in fact, they did. After the Germans surrendered, they did a command performance for General Omar Bradley had a luncheon for Marshal Koniev, the Marshal of the First Ukrainian Army, and Mickey Rooney and the other two guys in his Jeep Show squad did a performance for them. Yeah, Mickey Rooney, very interesting. The #1 worldwide box office star in 1938 and 1939. But he was outgrowing his great role was as a teenager. He played a teenager named Andy Hardy in these movies. I think he made 14 Andy Hardy movies, and they were wildly successful. But he made many other movies, and he was considered as a performer a genius by many of the actors and directors he worked with. But when he wasn't working, he was absolutely off the rails. He lived just the wildest Hollywood party life you can imagine, with all the bad habits that go with it. And his boss at MGM probably wanted to get him away from Hollywood. And at that point, in early 1944, there was some public pressure on all men of draftable age to particularly celebrities. So he joined, and to his credit, he could have served in the Los Angeles area at a movie studio making war films for the service, but he chose to go overseas and put himself in danger. So I'm full of respect for Mickey Rooney. And he had a tough time after the war because he was at 5'1", he was too short to be a leading man, and he was now too old to be a teenager. And he had to find his way for decades. He kept working, but his star years were behind him.
Yeah, he's an extremely fascinating character. What kind of stuff did you learn going through the research about him or about any of the other actors or actresses? Now,
Sure.
were there women actually on the front line doing this as well?
No, there were, as you said, USO, which was a tremendous organization, did tremendous work. And there were many women performers, stars and starlets that went all over the world with USO during the war. Alaska, unknown Pacific Islands, Europe. They did not go to the front lines because it was considered too dangerous. And USO shows were pretty large shows. And by the way, neither did the Red Cross go to the front line. So the enlisted entertainers were all men, boys, really young men, and mostly. And you'll be interested again for some of your older listeners. They'll know these names, but I can give you a short list of some of the enlisted entertainers besides Mickey Rooney.
Yeah.
Mel Brooks, who you may know from Young Frankenstein and a few other movies. Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh, I love him.
Yes, and actually, fascinatingly, the Army was segregated to World War II up until the late 40s. But Sammy Davis Jr., a black man, performed with with a white Jeep Squad, with his other Jeep Squad buddies, and possibly was the first black man to integrate the U.S. military.
Awesome.
I won't guarantee that, but and then, as we talked about Red Buttons, a famous actor, Burt Lancaster, famous comedian Dick Van Dyke, Don Knotts, and interestingly, the concept of the Jeep shows was put together by a Broadway director who was also serving. He was an officer, but he was serving in the Morale Corps, and it was to deal with the problem of the troops had advanced so far so fast that they could not be, and they were so advanced they could not be reached by the USO or other things. So Joshua Logan, who among other things directed South Pacific and Mr. Roberts and Camelot, came up with the idea of Jeep shows. When the Morale Corps troop went over, they were part of a big show called Hip Hooray, and they thought they were going to be doing this show in France for the duration of the war, and they were perfectly happy with that. But as so often happens in the Army, they got their orders changed, and they weren't told a lot of why. And they developed Jeep shows. The other thing that the Army made a lot of efforts on troop morale, and one of the things that I found was the Army showed a lot of movies to soldiers. Again, not at the front lines, but close. The Army bought millions and millions of books. They were called Armed Services editions, and they were printed kind of sideways. I mean, you didn't read it sideways, but it's about the size of half a book, and it's sideways, and that to make it not only portable to the front lines, but they also fit in the pocket of the soldier's field coat. So it was very interesting to find out what things the Army had sports equipment that they would get to the soldiers and other things. But these Jeep shows at the front lines were what interested me the most.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that they actually went to the front lines. I never grasped that concept until I started reading the book, and I was like, oh my goodness, that, we think of these actors, as just kind of, oh, you know, there they are or whatever,
Yeah,
or, oh, they didn't do much, but if you're going to the front lines, you're really putting yourself
right.
at risk.
And remember, these are enlisted, these are soldiers, so they are under orders at all times.
Yeah.
So some captain could look at them and go, "Hey, you pick up this bazooka, put down your microphone, pick up this bazooka and follow me. We're going to go kill some tanks or try." So, the USO performers were hardworking and brave, but they were civilians and they were not under orders. These young men these young men were under orders. They were mostly privates.
Military, I was surrounded by young people in the military. And then, I grew up in a military town, so I saw young soldiers. But I guess when I'm out of it and not really thinking about it, I kind of just gloss over that fact.
Yes, yeah. There were really, you could be drafted up to age 30 something, but almost no men that age were drafted because the draft boards were all local. And that's how it worked. The draft boards almost never drafted a father of a child. Yeah. So, as a result, for most men back then over 25, they were parents. And so they would have to, they would enlist if they wanted to serve. So yes, it was most of the soldiers were quite young, quite young.
Okay. So beyond the historical storytelling, what are some themes that you hope to convey through Jeep Show? What are some takeaways that you hope to resonate with the readers?
Sure. I think that the number one, the main theme, and it's a topic that has interested me for years, is morale, and and how you get morale and keep morale, because if you don't have morale, you can't do the hard things.
Yeah.
And certainly being a frontline combat soldier, or being an airman flying those bombers over occupied territory, that is a hard thing. And so my biggest takeaway was how morale was maintained and what the source of morale was. And interestingly, I read many first-person soldier, stories by World War II soldiers, and I think this is relevant to all soldiers in combat. But in the end, they were not fighting for freedom. They were not fighting for the grand ideas. In the end, the combat soldiers were fighting for each other, for their buddies, and to get the job done and get home. So the only way, the U.S. only fielded 90 divisions. And so unlike other armies, the infantry divisions were never relieved. They were never rotated back to the States like pilots were after a certain number of extremely harrowing missions. But so if you were in an infantry division, you were staying there unless you were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. But soldiers that were usually, when they were lightly wounded and treated and able to return to duty, they desperately wanted to get back to the unit they had been with because those were their buddies. And if that wasn't enough, nobody wanted to be a replacement in a unit where they weren't known, because it was very dangerous to be a replacement until the other soldiers trusted you and knew you. So they all wanted to get back to their unit. So to answer your question, the biggest thing was the theme is morale and how we bring ourselves to do the hard things. I learned go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I learned kind of an interesting fact as a history buff myself. The American Army was larger than the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Army Air Corps combined. And the Navy and the Marine Corps did not depend on the draft. They kind of got to cherry pick, if you will, the people that they wanted, the Marines and the sailors that they wanted. The Army, being so large, had to depend heavily on the draft. And thus, the Army was a very accurate cross-section of America, whereas the other services were not. So the Army was, had Catholics, Protestants, and Jews in it. The Army drafted Americans from the economically backward South to the bustling cities of the Midwest. The Army drafted PhDs. The Army drafted immigrants who they had to teach to read English so that they could read the material. And it had to be this way because the Army had to fight a war on two fronts. So as I got into it and read more and more accounts by soldiers, including Jim Hetzer, the soldier the book is about, I learned, America fielded millions of citizen soldiers who disliked the goddamn Army, were ambivalent about their officers, and resisted the trappings of military hierarchy, or as they called it, chicken shit. Yet many of them remember their service as the ennobling experience of their lives. If you ask them, they will tell you they fought not for their country or lofty ideals, but for each other, for their buddies, to get the job done and to get home. I had never really thought about the Army as America in uniform, but it really was.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And I'm from a Army town. So yeah, it was such a melting pot of the world, honestly.
Yes.
It was such a unique way to grow up, honestly. And I'm so thankful for that experience.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we are going to take another break, and then we're going to get into some more about the book. We are going to listen to Never Been to Spain by Andrew Wiscombe. We'll be right back.
Well, I've never been to Spain, but I kinda like the music. See, the ladies are insane there, and they sure know how to use it. They don't abuse it, never gonna lose it. I can't refuse it. Well, I've never been to England, but I kinda like the Beatles. Ooh, I headed for Las Vegas, only made it out to Needles. Can you feel it? Must be near it. Feels so good, feels so good. Well, I've never been to heaven, but I've been to Oklahoma. Oh, they tell me I was born there, but I really don't remember. In Oklahoma, not Arizona, what does it matter? Well, I've never been to Spain, but I kinda like the music. Say the ladies are insane there, and they sure know how to use it. They don't abuse it, never gonna lose it. I can't refuse it. They don't abuse it, never gonna lose it. I can't refuse it.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Welcome back to Into the Weeds podcast here on Military Broadcast Radio. That was Never Been to Spain by Andrew Wiscombe, and I love that song. He did such a great job on that cover. Okay, so we are back with Robert O'Connor, the author of Jeep Show. Robert, can you tell us what the difference is between writing a fiction book and a nonfiction book? Because I know you wrote a nonfiction book. Is it Gumptionade?
Gumptionade, yes. The booster for your self-improvement plan. I felt I needed a lot of self-improvement, so I sat down to write a book about it. The main difference between writing nonfiction and fiction is in fiction, you have to show, you cannot tell. So if your main character is very frightened, it is really not fair to the reader to say, Jim was very frightened, because it's boring. Basically, you have to show in his dialogue or his body, Jim dropped the spoon that was in his hand when he heard the report of the rifle. So that's the number one thing, is you have to show, not tell. And then secondly, you want to put in a lot of dialogue, because long sections, long paragraphs in a book, the readers tend to skip over them and go to dialogue, because dialogue is interesting between people. And so often we have these dialogues with people that are kind of adversarial. Nobody's cursing anybody, but you kind of have one opinion and I have another, and you would like to correct me, and you say, and that's very important in fiction, is to have adversarial dialogue, because it builds interest and tension. So show, don't tell, and put in plenty of talk. Those would be the two big differences.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I've had an idea for a children's book for a really long time, but the dialogue is what's stopping me, because I cannot get that down for anything.
Well, what I'd say, first of all, it is very difficult, but it takes practice. What I would suggest is get a couple of children together and, give them a subject to talk about, and just listen to the way they talk and how they fracture words and the kind of, dialect they use. And that can be inspiring. One thing I wanted to capture the way people talked in the late 30s and in the early 1940s. So I read several detective novels that were very popular in the late 30s and early 40s. They were a little hard-boiled, and and I watched several movies from that era just to get a feel for the words people use that we don't use anymore, and the way they talked. And I'll tell you, a word that people used all the time back then that we don't use anymore is swell. SWELL. That was that. Yeah, that was and it's the characters in Jeep Show say swell when they're happy.
I say that my grandma influenced a lot of my vocabulary. So
Yes.
I remember I used to say britches and all kinds of
Oh,
things.
yes. Well, you get in certain parts of the country. I live in Tennessee, and that britches is not unheard. Not unheard.
Yeah, I was surprised at how many of the words that I use have a lot of English origin,
Yeah.
or British
Yes.
origin. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, one
So
in the book. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, speaking of English origin, in the book, as in real life, this soldier's father was from the Appalachian Mountain community of West Virginia. And thus, when he appears briefly in the early chapters, as you probably remember, he talks in the dialect of the Appalachian Mountain people. And that dialect was kind of kept apart from the rest of the country by the Appalachian Mountains, and they almost talk with an Elizabethan English accent even to this day.
I'll ask my husband about that because his family is from West Virginia. His dad's side of the family.
Yes, yes. He will, if not him, he will have relatives. I think that he will be able to remember that talked in a very unusual way and with quite a vocabulary.
Yeah, I mean, just even their way of living was completely different as far as like not having plumbing and things like that. Even with my husband being born in 75, going in the 80s and still not having indoor plumbing and things like that.
Yeah. They are a proud group of Americans, and they look on the rest of us with some degree of suspicion, I think.
I don't blame them.
Right.
Okay. So in addition to writing, you have been a college soccer player. You have worked with Procter & Gamble, and you've also been on the board for Thistle Bee Enterprises, supporting women survivors of human trafficking. How did you get involved with that cause, and what impact has that had on you personally?
I got involved with that cause because a priest at my church was getting involved with starting up Thistle Bee in Memphis. And I have always liked children, and I wanted to be involved with helping children. And in this world we live in, if you want to help children, you help women. Yeah. Women are the force multiplier for helping children.
Most definitely.
And this program interests me. Basically, it's a resource-intense program where women who want to escape the life of prostitution and human trafficking participate in a 2-year residential program. And they get counseling, and they learn a trade, and work extremely hard. And not all of them make it through. We lose some to addiction, but it's very fulfilling. And in fact, it led me, when I was finishing this book, I very much wanted to do something similar for veterans. And I give $1 per copy sold to a veterans nonprofit called Shields and Stripes. And Shield and Stripes, very much like Thistle and Bee, is an intensive program for helping veterans who are struggling with mental health or addiction issues. It's a startup, which I really like, because, I feel like, my small contribution can have a great influence, but it's very much like what I did with Thistle and Bee. So that was very rewarding. And I nobody's had a better life than I am. I'm the luckiest guy you've ever met. And I just feel like, it's really important that I try to do something back for other people who are not as lucky as I am, and that's where that comes from.
No, that's great because a lot of people don't do that. So I admire anybody who takes self-reflection, and thinks about the greater good of the world. And so I thank you for
Oh,
doing
my
that.
pleasure. It's very rewarding in a way. It's like exercising when it's time to do it, you don't want to do it, and after you've done it, you're so glad you did it.
Oh yeah, totally.
Very, very rewarding.
Yeah, no, totally. Okay, so we are going to actually start wrapping this up, but I do want to ask you, because I forgot to mention this in the
Okay.
pre-interview. I ask all of my guests if they have ever had a paranormal, cryptid, or UFO experience, and if they would like to share it.
Thank you for the question. I have never had such an experience. I know that people do. I'm a born skeptic, by the way, which is not always a good thing. I do understand that people do. I have never had one, and I'll be very shocked if I ever do. But I understand it. I did have. Well, now that you've asked me, I did have one moment. Like all of us, I went through a tough time, a period where I felt like life had hit me in the face with a 2x4.
Yeah.
And I used to go to my local YMCA, and they had a free yoga class every night. And I went as much as anything just to be around people. I was very lonely at the time.
Yeah.
And, just to be in the presence of people. And we do this yoga, and I don't know if you've ever done yoga, but at the end, the last 5 minutes, you just lie on your back and relax and, try not to fall asleep and snore because that's bad. But so I was lying on my back, and suddenly I had a very strong feeling that a light was shining on me, just me. And I had the very strong feeling that my higher power, God, was looking down at me, shining the light on me and saying, everything's going to be all right. You are beloved. It lasted for about 3 seconds. I've been trying to get that feeling back ever since. But once is enough. So I wouldn't have called that paranormal. I would sort of call it a religious experience, but I think it fits that category. So I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, no, I think it fits that category as well. And the only reason I ask is because after my father passed away, our family started experiencing paranormal stuff. And so I'm just on a quest to try and figure it out and figure out why me and just to learn more. So, and I definitely believe that spiritual encounters are part of that whole realm, because I mean, if you believe in heaven, you believe in different dimensions, and so what's not to say something else isn't.
Do you dream about your dad?
I have several times. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I dream about my parents all the time, and they've been gone for decades, but they're alive still in that way.
Yeah, I dream of both of my parents. Both of them have been gone for quite a bit of time. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And so occasionally I will have dreams of them, and sometimes they're really great dreams, and sometimes they're just so confusing.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay, Robert, can you tell us what you have in the works, if you're working on any new books, or
I am. Yes. Thanks for asking. I am going to do a sequel to this book, and I am just now starting to kind of outline my ideas for the plot, but I think it will cover 1946. He returns home from occupied Germany in 46. The soldiers returning home from World War II, you could write a book just about that, about the experience of coming back to America. So I'm going to write, I believe I'm going to write from 46 to 52 or 53, so I can drag him into the Korean War. because I'd like to learn. We don't know it's not as studied as World War II, but it was a significant fight. So that's what I'm working on. I am going to try not to do one of the things they tell you when you're professional writers will tell you is don't do too much research on the front end, because a lot of what you research you will never be able to use. And
yeah,
I can tell you, Amber, I wrote a couple of brilliant chapters about different things that did not make it to the final book, that my editor read and said, boy, this is a great chapter about Billy Sunday the Evangelist, but what the hell is it doing in this book? So I'm determined to not over research the next one. But so I think 1946 to 52, perhaps centered around the Korean War, and I'll have to dream up some way that Jim Tanzer at age 38 gets involved with the Korean War.
Yeah, my stepdad was in the Korean War. So.
Yes. Yeah. Talk about bad conditions and a lot of suffering and courageous fighting. Yeah, that was a mess.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Okay, Robert. Well, do you have any social media accounts you want to let everybody know about?
There is a Facebook page for Jeep Show. There's a lot of extra material on my website. It is jeepshowbook.com, jeepshowbook.com. And then the book is available on Amazon, a printed, an ebook version, and an audio book for those of us that like to listen to books while we walk.
Me too.
So those things, that's the availability. And I'd love to get any comments from readers. You can reach me through the website about what you liked about the book, what you didn't like about the book, or for God's sakes, if you found a typo, let me know. There's a reward. There's a reward.
Yeah, I'll be in there looking.
Well, it's interesting. What you'll find out after you write your book, if you decide to do an audio book, is I actually was the narrator for my first book, and it almost killed me. And it took 3 times longer than a professional voiceover person would take. So for Jeep Show, we hired an actor. And so he's reading through the advanced copy of the book, and about every 10 pages, he's like, you put this word in twice. Yeah, this word is misspelled, or he would look up and go, what? So I'm sitting there listening outside the studio, and I got the circle with red pen, all these typos. So that was a great help.
No, that's awesome though that you're able to do that, because
I know it's a great way to proofread your book, because by the time you get to that stage, you're so sick of the book at that point that you can't even bear to read it.
I can imagine. Okay, Robert. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And guys, I hope you go and read his book and check out his other stuff. And I just thank you so much for being here, Robert.
It was really, really an honor and a pleasure. I had fun. Thanks so much for letting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. You have a blessed day.
Take care.
Thank you. You too. Okay, guys. So, yeah, go and purchase Robert's book. It's really good. I listened to it on audio, and I was actually listening and reading at the same time because I have the PDF. But it's hard for me to read sometimes. So that's why I choose Audible. They're not sponsoring me, by the way, but hey, if you want to. I hope everybody has a blessed day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.